Morning, everyone. Welcome to the Save on Energy webinar, Finding Opportunities in Your Energy Data. We're still just ahead of the hour here, so going to wait for some folks to trickle in from other meetings and whatnot. At this time, ask everyone to please keep your mics muted. If you do have a question, feel free to turn it on, ask your question, or raise your hand, or even put it in the chat. But kind of just standard practice, we'd like everyone to have their mics muted just to avoid any background noise. Thank you so much. All right, welcome everyone. I'm sure we'll have a couple more trickle in here, but it is the top of the hour, so we're going to get started. My name is Alex Thrower. I'm a senior analyst working in energy efficiency, and I'm here to kind of co-present with you with our guest Adam for the Save on Energy Fundamentals Finding Opportunities in Our Energy Data webinar. So for those of you who might not know, this is the fifth webinar in the series. And we'll add some links and stuff like that in the chat as we go. But all the other four webinars in this series are available on the Save on Energy website. So if you weren't part of those sessions and some of the information today really interests you, or there might be a couple gaps in the background, I would say before you ask any questions or before you kind of like jump to conclusions, start at that as a great place and a great resource to kind of build the stepping stones to get to where we are today. And so with that, I'm happy to pass it over to Adam Dixon.
Thank you, Alex. Yeah, and I like what Alex said there about how the kind of previous webinars have kind of somewhat been building blocks to get us to the point to get to process all of our data. We went through, the first one was energy kind of fundamentals, energy literacy. Then we understood our energy bill. Then we found out how to access some of our data. And then we did a little bit of processing on that and finding baselines and things like that. And now we're going to actually take some of this data and we're going to use different types of data. We're going to kind of cover a wide range of things. It's energy fundamentals here is an idea, so we're not going to dive specifically into a lot of detail on one specific technique. We're going to kind of cover off a few different techniques to pull out some information and kind of find opportunities in your data. So it by no means covers all techniques that are used out there. These are kind of the ones that I find the most useful and a kind of common practice, and it does take time to kind of learn how to look at some of this data and kind of find out what's going on. Depending on the level of data you're looking at it does take years of experience. I know I'm kind of, I'd say, I'm about 10 years into my full-time energy management world, and I'm still learning some of the techniques with some of the more refined data. I work with my father, who's been doing this for 40 years. He can look at some of the data and find things that kind of nobody else can find in there. So it does take a bit of time sometimes to learn some of these techniques, but there is some obvious things you can do. So let me just get back to my slides here. So myself, again, I guess it's been a little bit more than 10 years that I've been kind of knowing. Our company is called Know Energy. So Know Energy since 2013 full-time. I say full-time since then, part-time for the previous kind of 30 some odd years, because I have been my father's been doing this my whole life, so I have picked up things kind of over the years. So, and we do our kind of services. Lately, we concentrate on looking at all this energy data. We work with lots of people like the IESO, and you're going to see a software I mentioned a few times today called RETScreen Expert. It's a federal government software that we use to do a lot of this data processing. It takes a little bit to learn, but once you learn how to kind of navigate the interface, it does make some of these tools and techniques a lot easier to kind of go through there. So as Energy Managers Playbook, okay, there just mentioned there is a podcast out there. It's a good podcast in terms of energy content. If you want to listen to that, they have real world examples. They bring in people from across the province, real businesses, organizations, to discuss their kind of energy management goals, practices, and things they've done there. So, and again, I guess I should mention before we actually dive into the content, if you have any questions, raise your hand or type it in the chat. We may be able to do it kind of in live time here. You can speak up and do it. We are only have an hour here, so I don't want to take up too much time with questions. I'll try to answer them all, but if I can't, I will we can follow up and we can take care of all those questions. Sometimes the questions come in and it's a kind of a rabbit hole of things that we can do. So reach out after. There is access to post-training support as well. So if you email CIET or the IESO, you can get access to kind of some free coaching for attending these webinars. So we can set up a chat with an expert in whatever your question is. Maybe myself, maybe someone else. So if your question is bigger than we can answer here, we can definitely help you out kind of free of charge there. So by the end of this workshop, hopefully you'll be able to tell a story with various types of facility energy data. And I think that the story part is the key here, is that use this data kind of to create a narrative of what's going on in your building. You have to kind of come in, understand what's going on in your building, and then kind of tell a story and ask a lot of questions along the way. And so hopefully from that, we can identify signs of inefficiencies, errors, or unusual consumption. We can describe how to use benchmarks and historical comparisons. That's kind of where we'll start, is with benchmarking data. That's kind of the highest level. And then apply simple methods for visualizing data. The methods applied are simple, but they can be very powerful in terms of pulling out information about your energy there. We're only like time series graphs, not overly complicated to create, but you can pull a lot of information out of those. And then connect the data to real operational opportunities. So kind of combining all the previous things, understanding what's in your building, getting the data, you can kind of find real world opportunities. That's kind of the goal of this. It's nice to create a nice graph, but if you can't pull any information out of it, it's kind of useless. So, next step. So what types of energy data should we use to do this analysis? So to be very vague here, and if you've attended the previous webinars, there's a lot more detail on what type of data to use when, is it depends on the goals and the state of your data at that point. So if your goals is just to get a high level look at how your building is performing compared to other buildings, you can start with your benchmarking data. Or if your data kind of other than your bill data, your monthly data is kind of a mess, or you don't have any interval data, or you haven't organized it, you can kind of start at benchmarking and work your way down. And sometimes the goal out of energy data is to kind of organize it and get it in a good state before you can do any of this stuff. In this webinar, we're going to do three things. So we're going to start at a high level, and then we're going to get down into very granular information. So 15-minute interval data by the end. So the high level is our benchmarking data. So this is just annual data. Basically, we're going to take our total kilowatt hours or equivalent kilowatt hours if you're doing electricity and natural gas, or just kilowatts, divide it by the area of the building to kind of see how it is, the energy intensity is, and then compare that to other buildings or other kind of benchmarks that are put out by various organizations. Then we'll get into monthly data there. So we're going to do some regressions and Q sums, so cumulative sums. And this is kind of, I think this is my favorite way to do this. Everybody thinks you need to dive into the daily and the sub-daily data, but sometimes monthly data is actually the best data to work with. It's easily available, and it's just a little bit less processing. Finding the errors in there is a little bit more user friendly in that case. Getting the sub-daily, then that's where we're going to take 15-minute interval data, and there's a few different techniques I'll show you to kind of pull out some useful pieces of information in there. But if you dive into that, it is a lot of data, so that's fun. Overwhelming sometimes if you download even a year's worth of interval data, 15-minute data. It's just a lot of data process, but sometimes it can be a bit overwhelming at first. So next slide is, before we even dive into the actual data, a lot of times people come into these workshops, and myself included, are like, oh, I have all this data, I've graphed it all. How do I just look at it and find opportunities in the data? They don't actually understand what's going on in the building. And for me as a consultant, I'm oftentimes not even in these buildings. So people are like, how do I find opportunities? But I've never been in the building. It's sometimes you can find some things without being in the building or understanding the processes in the building, but oftentimes you need to understand the underlying process. So the data is like the heartbeat of the building. When we look at heart rate data, typically, if you're into some things like running, cycling, things like that, you kind of understand the variables that are influencing your heart rate at that moment. So did you run, if one day your resting heart rate's not quite as low as it should be, did you run a marathon the previous day? Or even when you're running the marathon, the elevation change as you're moving on, you understand the variables that are going on that are affecting your heart rate. So you have to kind of go through and do the same thing for your building. Do a walkthrough. One of the useful tools you can do to kind of understand what's going on in your building is just do a night walkthrough. That's one of the ones oftentimes we do, is that loads that are running when they shouldn't be. So waste in the building is often a huge opportunity in the building. So if you go through and walk through your building at night, see how it's being shut down, see what things can be shut down or aren't being shut down, things like that. That can be huge opportunities. Oftentimes with HVAC systems, you think they're being scheduled a certain way, but someone may have come in and overrode the BAS, and now you're running your system maybe 24/7 or at even a higher temperature, lower temperature than necessary. So go in, understand the building, see what's going on. If you're in a manufacturing process, that can be a little bit more complicated. Office buildings, a little simpler, things like that. But understand your building before you dive into any of this data here. So now the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get into our benchmarking data. And this is, I'd say, the simplest method. And kind of, it says benchmarking overall energy alone provides minimal clue as to the cause of the performance change. You can say whether it's high or low compared to average benchmark or a typical benchmark for your building, but it doesn't all the time tell you what's going wrong in your building. It's like, okay, we're high, now we have to dig deeper. So benchmarking by energy source and demand provides a little bit more insight and should be done. So separating electricity, natural gas, oil, propane, etc., as well as the demand intensity in your building to kind of get a little bit more information, but still maybe not as useful as getting into the monthly or the kind of the sub-daily data. So a higher electricity intensity with a similar demand intensity indicates longer operation or schedules. So that it causes more usage, but that may be necessary in your building. So, but it's just kind of indications of what's going on in the building. But a higher demand intensity with minimal change to electricity intensity is new equipment process, but with minimal consumption. So new equipment maybe starts up, causes your demand intensity to increase, but it's not actually being run for that long. So opportunities in your demand versus your consumption. And the difference between those two, if you remember back to our energy fundamentals workshop, is the time that they're running. So that can maybe direct you if you have high demand intensity, low electricity intensity, maybe look at things like startups of your building. Can you do a soft start on things to make sure that you're not spiking your demand there? With higher gas intensity with minimal change to electricity intensity suggests colder weather, if not corrected, or more heat load, typically outside air ventilation. So separating those two, you can actually pull out a little bit more information about what's going on and maybe find some opportunities where to look in your building, at least generally where to look. So this is an example. It's an older example, but oftentimes I do the benchmarking. It's oftentimes required for regulation to do that, but I can't actually find any opportunities there. But this is one building from a long time ago, actually, that we were able to find an opportunity, and it's kind of before my time as well. So we're looking at we had separated the demand intensity, the electricity intensity, the natural gas intensity, and then the overall energy intensity. So if we looked at our demand intensity compared to a typical peak demand intensity, this is in 1994 for an office building, was between 4 and 10 watts per square foot. So this building was operating as a 57,000 square foot office building at 6.7. So that was good. The electricity intensity, however, the typical range was between 14 and 26 kilowatt hours per square foot. This building was operating at 30.6 kilowatt hours per square foot. And then the natural gas intensity was actually kind of right on the lower end, actually between 12 and 24 was the average, and they were at 16.9. So if you would kind of sum this all up, you would see that they're probably, compared to 2014 averages, they were good, but at the time, their overall energy intensity was actually okay. So if you had just combined everything all into one, all you would see here is, okay, we're doing good. We're kind of right on average. The 47.5 at that time was kind of right in a good range. But when we dove deeper, we can see our electricity intensity here. And we set a goal here of lowering from 30.6 to 20. So about kind of right in the middle of the range. And that actually equated to, once they kind of dove a little deeper, they found the opportunity was on our electricity intensity, not with demand and not natural gas. So it kind of narrowed the search. And then they could go in and find opportunities. And if they were able to find those opportunities, and a lot of times it is in waste in our building, so base load, things like that, that equated to 600,000 kilowatt hours per year or $65,000 per year if they were able to do that. So, and in my experience, sometimes some of those savings can be very cheap or free if it's just waste in the buildings. There is technology you may need to buy, lighting, things like that. This is back in 1994. That was pre-LED lighting. So that would be an opportunity kind of a few years later as well. So, and actually in this building, the solution was to provide a small HVAC system to service the 24-hour operations center rather than run the entire building HVAC from 8 a.m. outside 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And this I know, again, this is back to 1994, but this isn't an entirely uncommon thing to see, that running kind of HVAC systems 24/7 to service small areas of the building. So oftentimes putting in a small system now, and some of those smaller systems are relatively cheap here. You put a heat pump in on a server room to serve that instead of running the entire HVAC system there. So kind of benchmarking can kind of give us the area to look in to dive deeper into our data there. So now, well, once we've done that, we say, okay, we want to look at electricity. What I would do personally is I would dive into our monthly data here. And if you've attended any webinars that I've done or my father have done, we will love our cumulative sums. So a cumulative sum is the differences between an actual consumption and a predicted consumption based on a driving variable. There's a lot more to that definition, but that's the general rule of thumb. I always like to mention that this is how a professional golfer scores himself in a tournament, where the actual consumption is their score and the predicted consumption is par, and they kind of sum those over time as they compete in a tournament of 4 rounds of 72 holes. So if by the end of the 72 holes, they were minus 15, that is the cumulative sum of the differences between the actual and the predicted value. So that can kind of, once we've done a baseline also, so I'm kind of very much generalizing this, I would say recommend go back to the previous webinar we did. It's all on baselining. We go into this a lot more detail. And then also reach out if you want to do this as well. So it is a very good technique. Create a baseline, compare it to the actual predicted. You can see how your building is performing over time. So in this graph here, we can see a slope up equals a slope up. It should not say that. I'm not sure. I must have had a bit of a brain fart when I created this. Slope up equals, I don't say not good. It basically means that you're using more than you've expected. Sometimes that is a bad thing. Sometimes that is necessary. If you're doing something like a building expansion, that is inherently going to drive up your consumption. I'm just going to actually see if this changes in live time. It's good. That's savings. Yeah, so basically slope up needs to be explained. It's higher use. Typo there. Oops, sorry. Trying to do too many things all at once. Slope down equals good or savings most of the time. I say until the last kind of 5-6 years. COVID did cause a lot of Q-sums to slope down rapidly from shutdowns. But so that needed to be explained. The Q-sum tells the story of the building over time. And this kind of simple one. Actually, before I do that, a flat baseline. So I'll use this graph here. If you have a flat baseline period, we go up. This is a compressor controls malfunction. Then they had a July shutdown. Then goes back up. Operations resume with new processes. So it's going to go back up. If it was to return to flat, this is where I want to flat equals baseline consumption. In theory, you'd think this building minus these new processes, it goes up from the controls malfunction. They shut down. Then they restart operations as normal. This would be a flat baseline. So returning to flat is baseline energy conditions. And then they also turn on electric heat. So it even tipped up even more. There is a kind of an inflection point in the middle here. And then in later periods, they did a lighting retrofit where it kind of starts to slope downwards there. And we can use this technique, if you go back to the previous webinar, to kind of move forward and for continual improvement as well. So if we baseline one period, and then kind of once we've done a retrofit or something's happened in our building, we've expanded it, we can re-baseline and see how our building is compared to that baseline period. So very useful technique. I'd say you can do it in a spreadsheet. A lot of people have done it in a spreadsheet. I'd say this is where I'm going to put a plug in for RedScreen Expert is the kind of the best tool if you want to do this. Monthly data is readily available. It's very user-friendly to kind of get a lot of data in there, bring in those variables like weather and kind of do this analysis. So it's a very good, robust technique. Is there anybody in here? Just raise your hand if you've come across or done a Q-sum. I know there should be a few people, I think, in here. Yeah. Okay. So next, this is another real world example of using a Q-sum to tell a story in a building. Was there a hand up and that wasn't a question? Just make sure before I move on, there isn't any questions in the chat there. No, we're good. A QSUM tells the story and creates the questions to ask and the places to look. So in this building, this is their baseline period here, and this is natural gas data. I know this is a Save on Energy ISO workshop, but we oftentimes heat our buildings with natural gas. So we can see here, this building was doing pretty good. And then right at the end of the baseline period, the energy consumption started to kind of tick up over time. And it flatlined here kind of in the middle of the graph. That's because this is actually, so give it away. It is a boiler retrofit or a boiler failure. So they aren't actually using their boiler in the summer. So we're not actually seeing it to continually tick up because they're not using their boiler in the summer. But we can see here that 1, 2, 3 months, they started to tick up. And that was about 20,000 meters cubed over 3 months, which isn't insignificant. I know this building used a fair amount of natural gas. It was a big multi-unit residential unit, but this kind of gave them the indication, okay, our building, something's failing. They, over the summer, replaced the boiler, and then they can actually see that boiler was the new boiler was actually much more efficient than even the old boiler, because once they did that, they started to actually tick down again there. So that tells the story. We can see kind of maybe after 1, 2, 3 months, we can say, okay, we need to start asking questions. Why are we using more than we'd expected? We've accounted for different variables like occupancy and weather. So all that considered, we're using more than we should. I would say probably after 2 or 3 months, you start asking the questions. 1 month can be an anomaly, probably not a big deal. If it ticks back down, you're good. 2 months, okay, be like, hey, need to flag this. 3 months, definitely something going on. We're using more than we should. Was that necessary? I know, again, if you dive in to use RedScreen Expert, there is kind of tools being built in there to kind of warn you as things come on, as your baselines change, as the consumption ticks up and down here.
Adam, we have a situational question regarding the QSUM from Julia. Okay. And the question is, if the slope only changes during the summertime, then it becomes flat in the wintertime, and the pattern repeats every year, what does it mean? Or is it a potential misuse of a baseline, or like the wrong baseline?
There could be a few things. So it's changing slope in the summer on electricity data, and it's not in the winter. So that's something to do with cooling in the building, I would assume. So, and you also could, I mean, with these tools, you could account for the seasonal change as well. So can bring out that change. There's a seasonal tool in RedScreen you could actually use to just kind of account for that seasonal change. So I then say, yeah, it's probably going to be something with the cooling on that side, because you're not using the cooler in the winter and there's no electrical heat in the building. Or if they're using electrical heat, it could cause it to go flat and return to baseline conditions. I think I'd have to look at that data. That's unfortunately with some of these situationally dependent ones, I may need to dive deeper into the data to kind of find that. But hopefully that answers it a little bit there. Feel free to reach out, Julia. We can figure that out for sure. Another question there. How do you make a baseline? Yeah, a baseline is based on previous years. It's not complicated process, but there is a bit of a kind of rules to follow. With weather data as the variable, it's about a year of baseline where there's not anything changing in your building is kind of the short way to say that. If you want to know how to make a baseline, again, I plugged it a few times, go back to the previous webinar. We cover an hour on just how to find a baseline period. And then if that doesn't explain it well enough, reach out and someone like myself can explain it to you as well in more detail. And would you recommend using normalized data for your QSUM? Well, if you're going to use RedScreen to do it, it will normalize it for you once you import those weather and occupancy variables there. So it kind of runs the regression and accounts for your weather and your occupancy there. I wouldn't normalize it outside of any tools you're going to bring it into it. Let those tools be there. What was the name of the webinar? Alex can find the exact name and maybe a link to it should be on YouTube now. So if you go to the Save on Energy page. Perfect. So the next example I have, and this is electricity data, and it was a lighting retrofit done. And the point I wanted to make from this one is that sometimes using this continual improvement model that I kind of mentioned earlier, where we have to re-baseline on our building here. So this building in the top right or top left graph, this is their baseline period, kind of pre an LED lighting retrofit. So they did an LED lighting retrofit, and you can obviously see savings. We've said slope down equals good equals savings, but that lighting retrofit is kind of the new normal in the building. So unless you're required to stick to a certain baseline for maybe a regulation, oftentimes we work with people, they have to use a specific baseline. So what I like to tell them is I say, okay, go with that baseline, do what you need to do. Sometimes you need to do adjustments on that, but then also show the full story where I would continually improvement and move forward. So what I would do here, and it may not even be obvious, is I've looked at thousands of these, so I can see it sloping down here. We're seeing our savings from our lighting retrofit, but something in here, it starts to kind of go flat again. And if we remember from a few slides earlier, that flat means that our energy performance in this building is returning to baseline conditions. And I'm going to make a pretty safe assumption here that they didn't rip out lighting retrofits. I don't know a lot of people, I don't know anybody who's ever ripped out a lighting retrofit. So something in this building is causing the energy performance to return to baseline conditions. So what I've done here is I've re-baselined, and I've used this period, kind of the after the lighting retrofit, as kind of the baseline. This is the new normal in the building. We're moving forward. We're not going to put in old halogen lights. We're going to go with LEDs from here on forward. And this is the graph below here. It looks like it's jumping around a bit. I know if you're being technical here, you want baselines to be kind of as small, or the fluctuations in the baselines to be as small as possible. If you look at the full data set, they're using 250 to 300,000 kilowatt hours in a month. This is kind of a relatively small fluctuation. It's just how the graph is rendered. So here at the end of the baseline period, we can actually see something happen. It's in early April where this graph jumped up steeply. So over a 6-month period, they used an extra 42,000 kilowatt hours in the building. Now, again, I wouldn't say, okay, someone's done something wrong. That's never a good way to go into a building or go to a building operator and say, what have you done wrong? I would ask them questions of what maybe happened in the building in April that caused them to switch over to maybe electricity. Was this something failed on the natural gas side and they had to bring in electric heat or something like that? Although this is the summer, so that's not likely. So what happened in the building? Because it actually would appear, if you look past that once that period was done, so you could apply a dollar amount to that, you could say, okay, 42,000 kilowatt hours at X dollars per kilowatt hour. This cost us this. But whatever we did, it actually appears that maybe by the end of that period, maybe that was a construction period. They were changing out something over the summer. Maybe they brought in some kind of, and I'm going to create an example here that may be not true. Maybe as a multi-unit residential building, I don't remember what type of building this is. And they brought in a bunch of window air conditioners because they were replacing the chiller in the building. So caused them to maybe use a little bit more, but then at the end, they have a new chiller and they're actually starting to see savings here. So I always say to myself, go get more data from this person to see if this pattern continues downwards. Because all of this is real world data. Any example that I'm going to show you or I've ever showed anybody in any webinar, it's real world data. You don't need to manufacture data to make these techniques work. They do work. So sometimes people are skeptical of that. So now we're gonna shift over, and once we've kind of done our Q-sums, our regressions, our benchmarking, if we want to, let's say we have a sub-meter or things on specific processes, or if you have a campus of buildings, oftentimes you have 1 meter for the entire campus, so you can do your benchmarking. So if it's a school typically or university, you can benchmark those. There's good benchmarks for that. Then you can dive in and do your monthly data. Even if it's a campus of 300 buildings, you can go in there and do a regression and Q-sum on that relatively accurately with few variables. We did it on a campus of 300 buildings. The original energy manager had 11 variables in there that were driving electricity consumption. We actually pulled it back to 3, and we're able to get an R squared on that of 0.9. So it is doable. But if you want to do even more detail on that, specific buildings, specific sub-meters within the building, we can do sub-meter data. And you do have access to your sub-meter or interval data for your buildings through your utilities as well. You can go back and usually get about 2 years of data from your utility if you want to do this type of analysis. And oftentimes getting this data is kind of a good place to start, because you can also, if you don't have good monthly data for some reason, you can create monthly data from your interval data. You can sum it all up and create your monthly data. So the three tools and techniques using interval data that we're going to discuss here, it's not entirely limited to this, and there's a lot of other things you can do with these graphs as well, but just in the interest of an hour of a webinar, we can't go too far into them. So we're going to look at some heat maps, then we're going to do load duration curve, and then we're going to look at a couple time series graphs here. And all of these tools, you can create them in Excel, other tools out there as well. But again, I use personally, the examples here I'll show you, I use RedScreen Expert. Again, it's a Canadian product, it's relatively affordable, and actually right now you can potentially get a free 1-year license from RedScreen if it's something you're looking at taking. Just using what's going on with Energy Star Portfolio Manager in the US, with the potentially that going away, RedScreen is offering Canadian clients free licenses to kind of port all of their data over and do some of the analysis. So if you're interested in that, reach out and I can hook you up with someone to help get a free license to that.
And Adam, we just have one quick question regarding RedScreen, and that is RedScreen using the appropriate heating degree days and cooling degree days based on the location, or do you need to define those parameters?
So RedScreen, when you're doing the regressions and QSUMs, you kind of, and I mean, if you know the balance point or the heating to cool days balance points in your building, you can create them for that temperature. So if you are the building operator, you probably know when your building switches from heating to cooling and vice versa. So you can do that. Or what I do, and if you've attended any webinars, is you go with the default temperatures that RedScreen uses in the software, and then you kind of do a little bit of data processing. And there is a tool in there. It's called optimizing the balance point or reference temperature. So that RedScreen does kind of a calculation for every temperature between a certain range and finds out what has the best correlation or best R squared or lowest error. You can optimize a few different variables there. So you can kind of figure out what the theoretical balance point in that building was, or the proper heating and cooling degree is what I guess how the question was asked. So when I say theoretical, because RedScreen at the end of the day is statistics, I would still go back and check that data with somebody in the building. It can give you some weird numbers. You can get cooling coming on at 5 degrees. So I would just, if you get that, go check with someone in the building and be like, well, do you turn your cooling systems on at 5 degrees outside? Maybe they do. Maybe it's a manufacturing process and they have a lot of heat being put in the buildings. They do need to cool it. But always check any statistics that RedScreen gives you that can be correlated to real world things like that. So it's a bit of a long-winded answer to that, but yes, you can tell RedScreen what temperature to use. So interval data, time. This isn't time series. This is heat map. So I'm gonna just jump right into the heat map here. Again, this is real data. You can show a heat map for any kind of period you want to see. Kind of if you have 15-minute data, you can look at one single day to see when within that 15 minutes period you're using the most intense energy. And this is basically, it's a quick way to dive in, dump a lot of data in here, use color to kind of point out the areas you may need to look at depending on what type of building you are here. So this is a heat map for February 2023 to January 2024. So it's a repurposed school. So this school was decommissioned as a school, and it's now being used as kind of an artist's market / residency. So artists can rent out each of the classrooms. They can come and go as they please. It's kind of, there's no real set schedule here. So what we did, we came in here, we did a heat map, we did a load duration curve, and we also did a time series graph to find some really good opportunities in this building. So here you can basically quickly see, I said, it looks like this building is basically still operating as a school. And that's ended up what we found is that the BAS system had never been changed from when it was a school. So it was still kind of turning on, turning off like a school. You can see here the 5-day schedule, the kind of lighter areas in the center there. That's the summer months when kind of students aren't there. Although when it's now an artist market, maybe they are there. So it was, no one was really controlling the system in there. So there was a lot of waste that we ended up finding. And you could also see kind of beyond seeing it still being operated as a school, you can see that it seems like every morning it is very intense in the morning there. So something is going on where it's turning red every day in the morning there as well. So what can we do here? How can we kind of find out what's going on? So what we did here is we said, okay, we need to look at, first of all, Why is it operating as Monday to Friday kind of school schedule? What is the real schedule in the building, and can we change that to match what's going on in the building, or give the artists some information on how they can control the temperatures in each room? So, well, okay, so that's, I'll finish this story of the repurposed school kind of once we get over into the time series graph. I'm going to jump next to the load duration curve. This is a useful tool. You can see those mornings there where the kind of the high demand there, that's like the load duration curve can come in handy. So what I've done here, I did a quick Google search as the definition of a load duration curve. Just everybody always likes to have a little AI in their life nowadays, so that's how I implement it here. I still think AI is a little bit of ways. People always ask me, how can I use AI to analyze my energy data? I think we're a little bit away from that. We need to still have a human look at it and kind of manicure the data and look at things. A load duration curve is a graph in electric power systems that arranges the power demand data from highest to lowest, showing the percentage of time the demand exceeds a certain level. Unlike a load curve, which orders data chronologically, this curve helps utilities and kind of organizations plan generation capacity, determine optimal plant sizes, and understand how long different load levels occur over a period, with the area under the curve representing the total energy consumed. So basically, what the rule of thumb that I've kind of used over the years when you're doing load duration curves is that you basically want to look at the top end here. There may be other things in there as well, but the main thing is that you use this kind of 1 to 3% rule. So anything that's in that 1 to 3%, so kind of that peak demand up in the top here, that's probably going to be manageable without interrupting the operation of the building. Anything below that, outside of that, you may be interrupting the operation of the building, and it may require a little bit more thinking through to kind of find savings in there. But anything in that 1 to 3 range, you may be able to find opportunities, and it may seem like a small section of the graph, but depending on how you are billed on your energy bill, that 1 to 3% can be a massive portion of your bill. If you're billed for demand, that can be thousands of dollars a month. And again, some of these things I'm saying about being billed for demand, things like that, we did a specific webinar, an hour, on understanding your bill and how people are billed across Ontario for the most part. So you can see how demand can affect your bill. And again, this one's a little bit harder to create in Excel. That's where I use RedScreen to do that. It is very easy. I import my data, click one button, tell it what I want to do, done. So now we're going to dive into kind of what a lot of people want to do now is demand profile using, this is 5-minute interval demand data. And I've also brought in another piece of information, which is useful if you have it, if you can get access to it and understand it a little bit. Using your power factor data can be very useful in finding opportunities in your buildings. You don't need this power factor data. There is things you can do. I just like to do it because it's kind of the full picture of what you can get and what you can do there. So power factor is essentially essentially how effectively you're using the power from the utility in your building. So kind of generalization, things like lights, electric heaters like that, they have a very high power factor. Things that have kind of maybe a lower efficiency, like a motor, a fan, a pump, they have a lower power factor. I know if you're more experienced in this world, I realize I just generalized that a lot. But if you're interested in power factor, Google power factor or reach out. I can explain it in a lot more detail. Or go back to kind of the first webinar in this series, the energy literacy. We do discuss power factor in here. So knowing that things like motors, fans, pumps with a lower efficiency lower our power factor, and lights, electric resistance, heat, things like that, resistive loads, they increase our power factor. We can combine that with our demand to kind of understand potentially what is going on in our buildings here. So, and this is a building and real world data. Again, we installed a meter on here. We can see here this is somewhat during the day. This is like kind of part of the workday here. We can see kind of spikes in there. And whenever I see spikes, I always ask questions. This was determined that was the elevator operating in the building. So probably not an opportunity there. You might need the elevator there. And you can see the power factor is the top line, the blue line. It's sitting at about 0.85 here, all kind of during the day. That's the combination of the electrical load, so like computers, lights, electric heat in the winter maybe, combined with the motors, fans, and pumps that typically in maybe an office situation would run your HVAC systems. So it's not perfect. I mean, above 0.9 is kind of the goal. But then you can see as the lights go off at the end of the day, the power factor starts to drop. Then we have a small motor load go off, so it actually goes up a bit more. Then once we have a larger motor load go off, which is actually increases the power factor. So you can actually see what loads are turning on and off and gives you a little bit more detail about where to look in your buildings. Do I need to go look at my lights? Do I need to go look at my HVAC? Things like that. So it's giving you, you're kind of a detective, and it's giving you the area in the building to kind of go look at for these opportunities. Maybe there isn't an opportunity, but it tells you where to actually look. Then you can see overnight, miscellaneous equipment gets turned off. Obviously, I think it's electric equipment there. So it's not changing the power factor a whole lot overnight. And then this, one of the opportunities they did find in this building actually was ended up, they had a high power factor. Overnight, they had all of the electric heat people were kind of bringing into the building. So they kind of rejigged the HVAC systems, and they were able to kind of find opportunity there. You can see the motors come on in the morning, the power factor drops drastically on startup, and kind of the reverse kind of thing that happened overnight there with the lights on, motors off in there as well. So using power factor combined with your demand data, you can pull out kind of a lot of information about your building. And it does, I would say if you can get this data, try it out. Download it, overlay it on a time series graph. Don't need to buy any external tools. All of these are very easy to create in Excel. So you can do all of this here. You don't need to go out and even do red screen to do that. This is a very easy thing to do just in Excel.
Adam, we have a quick question from Kyle pertaining to the power factor, and it surrounds kind of, is 0.85, or is there any other power factors where it is a recommended take action point, kind of like where that's a red flag that you would really continue to look even deeper or more critically at?
So at 0.85, I'd say, I mean, that's probably generally where I would go. I would probably ask somebody with a little bit more familiarity on power factor correction and things like that than myself. I'm going to say I'm not necessarily the expert on that. There may be actually somebody in this room that could answer that better, but I'd say that's where I would start to look at things. If it's operating around that all of the time, then I would look into some things you can do, or even some power factor correction things as well. There is capacitors you can install in your building to kind of help increase your power factor, because it does affect your bill as well. So again, if you interested how that affects your bill, your power factor, there is that information is all in that understanding your energy bill webinar as well. Sorry, that didn't really answer the question. Again, Kyle, we can chat offline a bit about that if you want, if you're interested in that. And it may not be me that is the expert on power factor there as well. So this is, again, we're going to come back to that repurposed school. I think these dates are, this is the full year here, but I say when I dive in here, sometimes seeing the full year data, it's not that useful. I can see lots of spikes here, so I would definitely want to come in here and look at all these spikes in there. But other than that, there's not a lot of granularity I can see. I can't quantify anything like that. I say they have a pretty high peak demand relative to their kind of base load or average demand. So I would say maybe there's a demand issue in this building. That's what I would look at, and that was the solution. That was one of the issues that happened in this building. Again, this is where kind of maybe using RESPEN is a little bit more adept. I can use this, get this data in here and jump between different time periods and kind of zoom in and see what's going on a little bit quicker than Excel or some other tools out there, although can be done in Excel quite efficiently as well. So this is where we've repurposed school. So this is the demand profile for the week of February 19th, 2023. So this was actually the Family Day weekend in 2023. So even if this was a school, I'm going to start from that point. If this was a school, I would say, okay, well, the Monday, why was the BAS not scheduled to kind of turn off on Monday? That was a holiday. It should act more like the weekends. So that was an opportunity. We found that most holidays, even if this was operating as a school, were not programmed into this BIS system as well. So they were missing out, maybe not a huge opportunity, but it is an opportunity that is essentially free to implement. Someone who works at BIS can hop in there and change that quite quickly. The other thing here is this is where we see those kind of those spikes in the building. So even if this was, if it was a school, there's still an opportunity maybe to kind of offset the startup. And what ended up happening in this building, we said, okay, there's a huge spike in here. And I think this ended up being, I'm going to say almost $1,000 a month in savings on this from the demand charges from what they could do, operating it as an artist market, not as a school. It'd be a little bit different as a school, but these huge spikes at the beginning of the day, looking at that, questioning that, we walked around the school. Actually, we figured out that every morning, each classroom had its own electric unit heaters in them. So they were coming on all at once. They were scheduled to come on at 7:45-ish in the morning, kind of right before the school would normally start, to heat up the buildings, heat up the classrooms. But most of the time, in the 2 days that I went through this building, there was virtually nobody in it. There was nobody going into those classrooms. This was happening with nobody in the building. They were hitting set points. So what they said is, okay, can we, first of all, if it was a school, they could maybe start the startup a little bit earlier. So a school starts at 8:30-ish. You want it to be up to temperature. So you could start bringing those unit heaters on, kind of staggering them. Ideally 15 minutes apart, so you're not setting your peak demand. So they could reduce this peak demand from almost 200 kilowatts to generally just over 100 kilowatts was kind of the opportunity. So they could almost cut their demand in half here, potentially. Not every day, but that is kind of what we looked at there. So, and as an artist market, there was an even bigger opportunity where basically unlock the thermostats in each room. And as an artist comes in, they're able to turn on the heat if necessary. So the base temperature, but they were able to actually come in here and turn on the temperatures as they needed them. So looking for spikes, you can also find a lot of times you see compressors cycling is a common one. So you're going to see up and down throughout the day when maybe you shouldn't expect to see that. You think you're using consistent energy throughout the day. Diving in here, you can see things kind of fluctuating, turning on and off. The other thing you can oftentimes see is your base load too high? Is there waste in your building that you can eliminate there? Can you turn things off, turn them down, things like kind of the free opportunities? And kind of the general rule that I've come across that people use on that is that your building turn down should be about 75% of the total of the peak in the building there. So if you're using 150, I'm going to go with on the end of the week, 150 would be their ideal kind of demand. You would want to turn that down by about a third or a quarter is kind of the range you want to do. So bring it down. This one's not bad, actually. Bring it down to that 50 or maybe even a little bit below there overnight. So this building wasn't bad, but if this was sitting up here around 100, they weren't turning things off. That's where I would recommend what I mentioned earlier in that night audit. You can walk through and say what's left on. And we've done this on many buildings. There's some large buildings in Toronto. They've done that. They found basically entire floors that were empty from tenants at this point. They weren't being rented out. The HVAC system was running full blast. And on top of that, running above temperatures and things that they thought they were running as well. They basically hadn't looked at things in a couple of years, thought they were doing good, but they were able to find huge savings in there. So peak demand, base load, cycling, things like that. You can oftentimes dive in here and see what's going on in your buildings here. So let's see what's next here. So, and I guess that kind of brings me to the end of the data on this one. So basically what I want you to take away from this, and we'll have about 10 minutes here if there is any questions at the end. So use the data that is appropriate for your goals. Don't do extra work. Don't go gather data. It is sometimes a little bit of work to get data, process data. Figure out what your goals are, then figure out how do you, so there's a question here, how do you see both real and apparent power in the site for the energy data? Well, for that, you'll need to get the power factor data if it is available to you. That one's the kind of the harder one to get, but talk to your utility on that one to get your power factor data. Learn about the building first. I can't understate that a lot. I mean, a lot of times, like in the day and age with AI, things like that, we think that all of these systems is just going to find the opportunities for us. We're just going to dump a bunch of data in. It's going to know what's in our buildings. That's not the case yet. Maybe it will be one day, but it's not there yet. Understand your building. Even before you go to a consultant and ask them to do the work for you, you should have an underlying understanding of what's going on to help them as well do better analysis on your building. I've seen bad audits, bad analysis done by consultants as well, because they never stepped foot in the building. They didn't ask enough questions. So understand the building, ask questions, create a story using one or more methods of analysis, and you can do them all. That's probably the best thing to do. If you have all this data, you can basically, if you start with your interval data, you can create all the data upwards and do very detailed analysis and understand a lot about what's going on in your building. And again, ask more questions than answers. Always don't assume things, don't give answers right away. Do the analysis and then go and ask questions. If you are the building operator, maybe you have the answers. But if you're not the building operator or someone who's in the building every day, use these tools to ask more questions, tell a story, then to give answers. You show on and give answers. And also, again, if you're a consultant, sometimes you can be wrong, and then it kind of knocks your credibility as well. So ask a lot of questions. So I think, yeah, that's it for this kind of scheduled content. So we just want to promote, stay connected with the tools and resources. So there is, I've mentioned a couple times, virtual one-on-one coaching, post-webinar support. There's a link there. I think you'll have access to these slides as well, tailored to your organization. So if you have a specific question, if I didn't cover enough detail, didn't answer one of your questions here today, reach out to this form. You will be directed to the appropriate expert in that area. There's also monthly bulletins on what's going on with Save on Energy live training calendar. So if we've done kind of these energy fundamental series, and now you're ready to move on to the more detailed, more expert ones. There is more advanced training available as well, kind of free stuff out there. Lots and lots and lots of support out there for this. And free. I can't understate that. If you attend these things right now, between Save on Energy and actually with Red Screen as well, I know I've mentioned a few times, there is access to a lot of free training out there and coaching.
Yeah, I can just chime in on that one. When it comes to the energy fundamentals sort of learning path, this series of 5 webinars, this is the last one in the series of 5, but coming up in the end of this year and into the new year, we'll have, under this sort of same learning path, there'll be some sector specific webinar series. So there's going to be a multi-unit residential building one, there's going to be a municipal facilities focused one, and there's also going to be a healthcare and healthcare facilities focused mini series. So keep an eye out for those 3. And the links that were just on the screen are now also available in the chat. And the best way to kind of keep an eye out for those is to sign up for the bulletin and keep an eye on the live training calendar that Adam mentioned.
Yeah, and the last thing is we do want your feedback as well. We constantly adapting these things, changing these things. So if you found this webinar useful, great. Like to hear that, but also if you'd like to see other things and then how we could have done it better, definitely want to hear that as well. So take some time, please, and do that survey for us as well. But that's it for me today. I know we're maybe a few minutes ahead of schedule, which is a good thing usually. So I'll stick around for the full time to answer any questions as well. So we have 7 or 8 minutes here that some of those other questions I can maybe go into.
And in line with that, I'd just like to thank everyone for the engagement and the questions that we get during these webinar series, because at the end of the day, if you have a question that you're lingering about, there's a good chance that someone else has the same question or a very similar one. So engaging with us really helps steer the content, and hopefully you'll join us for the next series that are coming up sort of under this learning path. Kyle?
Hey, Adam. I maybe just wanted to dive a bit deeper into that one question I had about power factor. I can totally reach out to you over email if it's easier to do that. But if it's just a simple answer, maybe we can do it here. So I saw, looking at that slide that you had about diving into power factor, looking at it from like an interval perspective. So we currently don't go to that level of analysis, but we do have like power factor on demand-based accounts, like through Hydro One.
Yeah.
Is it sufficient to just look at that power factor value and kind of, be able to say, it's at 0.8, this, like, we need to look into power factor correction, or is it kind of looking at too wide of a range of time to really dive into that?
No, that can be a tool to do that. I say I
Okay.
don't like. Well, oftentimes I like to give out rules of thumb on where to do that, but yeah, you can definitely look at that. If that's low, then you for sure need to look at stuff. If that's high, it's probably good. It's that in between range where it gets a bit of a gray area where it's a little bit more complicated. But yeah, definitely you can use your billing data to see if you have issues there.
Okay, and maybe just the second part to that question, is there kind of like a KPI or a rule of thumb that you would use, or is it like really dependent on the type of facility? Like we have like rec centers where there's going to be a bunch of inductive loads. We're going to have a lower power factor as a result of that. So is there a rule of thumb, or is it very dependent on the building architect?
Kind of there's both. Say so it's generalizing. Right now I'm drawing a blank on the rule of thumb off the top of my head. I apologize for that, but there is rules of thumb, but it is also very situationally dependent. So you may go with the rule of thumb, but then dive deeper and find out that it's not what you need to do necessarily.
Okay.
So I know that's yeah, it's general, but yeah, it's these things are so. I think overall it's more situationally dependent. Is the better way to put that.
Gotcha. And I guess
lean towards that.
What you already did answer to is maybe when we do start, even on the utility bill level, we start seeing it hover around like the 0.85 level. That's where it's maybe like, let's take action. And I guess maybe to follow up on that, is it an issue if it's like that? Like how many months of the year is that? Is it bad if it's even 1 month, or is this when we start? Because we'll see it change. Like, we start putting our ice in.
No, definitely. Shifting like electric heat, all those sort of things, it'll definitely change over time. Yeah, I wouldn't be able to give you an accurate answer on like what the rule of thumb on how many months it's going to be on that.
Gotcha. No, that's fine. And maybe just my last question: is there maybe like I could do the research, but is there maybe like a credible place to look where I could dig into maybe some of this information, or like where would you recommend me researching to get?
I mean, in the first place, I would talk to someone at the utility. They may be able to help you as well, or say reach out to like an expert in that area, and I could put you in touch with a few that are more of an expert than I am as well, like that. So I would say the place first to not go is someone who's trying to sell you power factor correction necessarily. You may need it,
sure.
but anybody so I would say. Reach out to Save on Energy, or I can give you, if you send me an email, I can give you a few contacts of people that have done this a lot and know a lot more about it than I do. Because I know enough to be dangerous, but not an expert in it, in power factor correction.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
A good electrician might be someone to talk to as well.
Okay. Yeah, that's I'll follow up with you with an email, but I think I'll reach out to Hydro One. That's also a good recommendation.
Yeah, because they depending on the situation, they may approach you and say you have issues it's creating issues for us as well. So
yeah, definitely. Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, no worries.
Adam, we have another one that came through the Q&A side of things as well. If you can see that, it's another one from Julia. That's a little longer that I won't read out, but I might pass off to you.
Yeah, I don't think I can see the Q&A, unfortunately. Yeah, Julia, I'll when Alex sends me that question, I'll take care of it and send you an email probably at this point.
The question kind of surrounds the example from earlier and sort of establishing a baseline when they had the summer peaking, kind of the warnings of when things were going up in the summer. And the question is do we take a minimum of 12 months of data points before the previous year, or from the previous year before the retrofit happens, or essentially is only 1 year enough? Because there only be 5 months of that data in the summer.
The baseline period, I like to take like 1 year previous to whatever the issue was, whether it's a retrofit or a problem. If the slope of getting into the detail, the overall Q sum, if the slope of the line is relatively flat prior to that, then I would use that. I always use the 1 year if you're using weather as a data with the flattest slope prior to the event. There's other ways you can dive in if you don't have that much data. or if you're required to use a specific period, you can use any 1 year period and do baseline adjustments. But again, that's a more complicated endeavor and can be a bit confusing. So it's not a widely used, I mean, it's widely used, but I don't think very well understood technique.
Mm-hmm. And I think more generally speaking, for everyone who's still around, I guess the question kind of surrounds if you have an event that's happening in a very specific window of a year, and maybe your baseline is for one whole year, if it's enough to have just that specific window for a year, or if you want multiple, let's say a season, so in this case the summer, multiple summers leading up to it to kind of add up to 12 months of data as a baseline.
Doing multiple years of baselining is tough.
Yeah.
And can cause issues. There's other issues that can come up with that.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I say if you're doing seasonally in Red Screen, you can do like 2 summers. You want one full cycle of the maximum and the minimum of the variables is the ideal. I guess if you forget, maybe I'm misunderstanding the question, but if you're getting into shortening the baseline period for what's available, you can shorten it a little bit, as long as you're not using it for something like an incentive or IPMVP or things like that. If you just want an estimate of what's going on in your building, you can bend the rules a bit. So that's oftentimes, as long as you're getting close and you can keep an eye on the accuracy of it. Once you get into some of the more detailed statistics, you can bend the rules for sure.
That's great. I hope Julia, that helps guide your question, but I would definitely encourage you to reach out through the post-training support intake form, and we can provide you some time to kind of work on this specific example that you're speaking about. Wonderful. And with that, I think we will wrap up and end things here. So thank you again, folks, everyone, for joining us today. And we'll hope to see some of the same names in the future webinars. Thanks so much.
Have a good day, a good weekend.